In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to do the poke test, which is a pretty good way to know when your dough is done proofing and ready to bake. Then I'll also tell you why I think the poke test can be a little bit deceiving. Here we go. When I'm talking about the poke test, I'm going to be using this definition from Cook's Illustrated, that when you poke your dough, if the dough springs back right away, it needs more proofing, but if it springs back slowly and leaves a small indent, it's ready to bake. That's what I'm going to be going off of. Alright, to show you an example of the poke test, I'm using a loaf of sourdough bread that I just shaped at 6 p.m. and it's ready to start proofing. As the dough proofs for a couple of hours, it's going to be filling up with air, and generally speaking, the more it fills up with air, the more my finger is going to leave an indent in the dough when I poke it. You'll see that for this recently shaped dough that hasn't had a chance to proof yet at all, when I poke the dough lightly, you see that the dough just bounces right back. It doesn't leave much of a finger indentation at all. Here we are at the 45-minute mark. I want to show you what it looks like when your dough is not quite fully proofed, but you do the poke test. My dough usually proofs for about an hour and a half, so this is about only halfway done. And I'm going to freeze right here because you see that my finger left an indentation in the dough. If you're told that you're looking for your finger to leave an indent mark and then your dough is ready to bake, you might be fooled right now into thinking that this dough is ready to go, but it's not. This is where you really have to get a feel for your dough. It's basically a trial and error process. Notice that most of my finger indentations are kind of bouncing back. And when I feel the dough, I just feel that it's not very puffy. There's really not a lot of air inside of the dough at this point. And so I just know through hundreds and hundreds of loaves that my dough is not ready yet. Even though sometimes my finger is leaving a mark in the dough, this is kind of why I think the poke test can be confusing to new bakers. In my mind, yes, you want your finger to leave an indentation, but you want to feel that the dough is significantly puffy. And here at the hour and a half mark, which is when I usually am ready to bake my bread, you're going to see hopefully a big difference. When I give a light poke to the dough, it does bounce back, but I feel a lot more air in this dough. And even when you look at how much it's risen in the Banneton basket, you can see that it has risen significantly compared to 45 minutes ago. And so when I give it kind of a harder poke with my finger, I feel like the indentation holds itself a little bit better. And if your dough is feeling puffy to the touch and you're getting multiple points throughout the dough where you're getting that finger mark, the indentation, that is a great sign that your dough is ready to bake. That usually happens for me around the hour and a half mark to 2 hours. So I also want to show you what it looks like when you do a poke test on an overproofed dough. So I'm going to let this keep going for a while. Here we are at the 3-hour point, and almost every single poke I do leaves a good indentation in the dough this time. And you can also hopefully see just how high this dough has grown over the 3 hours. It's completely reached the top of the Banneton basket at this point. That's actually a great thing to look for if you just don't want to worry about the poke test at all. But if I was just doing the poke test at 3 hours right now, I'd see these finger indentations and think, this dough is ready to bake, I better bake it right away. But if I were to, for some reason, keep going to the 4.5-hour mark, I would see that this dough is growing over the top of the Banneton basket. Wouldn't even need to do the poke test at that point. But watch this. Even though this dough is super inflated, puffy, and full of air, the dough still bounced back and almost totally filled in that indentation. The poke test can be a little deceiving at times. You just got to use your common sense, your best judgment, and know that this dough is really inflated. It's really proofed a lot. Give it another couple of pokes, and you'll see that it's leaving a couple indentations there. And just using my common sense, I know that this dough is ready to bake. It's probably even past its time when it would have been best to bake this bread. Okay, I really want to push this dough to its limit and show you what that looks like when I give it a poke test. Some people say when the dough is really overproofed, the dough feels like it's going to collapse when you poke it. So I kind of want to push it to that point, but it's getting late, so I'm going to cover this up, put it in the fridge, and try again in the morning. There's that lovely balloon. If I did my math correctly, this has been in the fridge for an additional 9 hours and 15 minutes cold proofing. And since it's so far along in the proofing process, it definitely grew in size in the fridge as well. Now, while all of my common sense is telling me that this dough has grown too much, it's overproofed, it's going to collapse if I bake it right now, the poke test is not really showing me that. It is bouncing back every time I poke the dough. It's not even leaving that much of an indentation every time I poke the dough with my finger. I'm thinking that has something to do with the dough coming straight from the fridge. The dough might bounce back a little more than it would if it were at room temperature. I'm not really sure on that, but that's just another reason that the poke test might be a little deceiving at this point in the game. But this dough has proofed for so long, and I know it's ready to bake, so I'm gonna go ahead and turn the oven on now, get it preheating for about a half hour, and then we'll see what the dough looks like at that point. Alright, my oven is heated, and this is definitely the most I've ever poked a dough in my entire life. Time to bake this one. Despite pushing the proof really far on this one, I'm really happy with how the bread turned out. Let me know what you think of the poke test in the comments below, and if you want to make my recipe for sourdough bread that I used for this video, go ahead and click this video right here.